So I'm making my first ever artist book. It's been a massive project for me this year. A lot of late night printing, drawing, and layout making. And it's been a big challenge trying to work with an offset printer in Seoul for the very first time. Of course, I've made a lot of zines and small publications before, but this is my first time making a proper hardcover book with a production team. And in case you're ever thinking of making your own artist book, I wanted to give you a glimpse into the process and some things I've learned along the way. So let's talk about background and inspiration for making this book. If you guys have been following my channel for a bit, you know my sketching process and how I like to draw every day in this Hobonichi Techo notebook. This project is about bringing all of those little pieces of my process together into one big project. So this book was just a way for me to put that together. First of all, inspiration can come in the form of other people's books, especially when it comes to artist books. So there are a few books on my shelf that I always reach for and think of when it comes to the look and feel of books I like. When it came to printing choices and material choices, these were definitely books I gravitated towards. And so when it comes to making an object like an artist book, those were things I kept in mind as inspiration when I started making a mood board. And making a mood board to me is really important because I just need to see things visually in front of my face. Otherwise, if it's all scribbled in a notebook, I get a little bit confused and scatterbrained. For this project, I used Milanote to plan everything out because it really gave me that bird's eye view of my project, and it was really easy to keep account of all of these kind of complex moving parts and ideas. If you guys don't know what Milanote is, I like to think of it as a digital studio wall, so I can put all of my inspiration, different timelines, all these sort of things. This is just like a way more flexible and portable way for me to bring my ideas along with me. One of my favorite things is that Milanote has all of these templates that you can start out with. So I started out with the mood board template, and that kind of just gave me a base to work with of, okay, I can insert some photos here and kind of start off with some color story ideas and some general notes. And then I could expand that into adding subboards, a to-do list, and all these other little widgets. You can even add little hand-drawn doodles, which was useful when I was trying to think of what I should do for the cover. So here is a general walkthrough of my board and also some things I would recommend for planning your own art book project. So first, I kind of have some main images, kind of my idea of what I want the cover to look like, and I have some example interior spreads. So I have some really rough mock-ups, and I started out also with a general color story for the board. Then I added on to that with a couple more like production notes. So again, I made this timeline where I could keep track of like how many sketches I had done and how many illustrations were finished. There ended up being 12 sets of 9 illustrations. So I needed to make sure I was on track throughout the weeks and that I was completing these batches in time, because it ended up being more than 100 illustrations that I then also had to organize and add text to in the end. You can also see I have like a production column. So I kept notes about, with the printer I'm working with, the type of printing that they offer, the different kind of cover treatments I could do, or different type of binding treatments I can do. And having all of those examples next to each other visually helped me make decisions as well before I went to the production meeting. So I could see like, okay, they offer this type of binding, this type of binding, that type of binding. What one do I think would work best, so I don't even have to like chat about all of the options with them? I could kind of zero in on like, these are the 2 that I'm considering, and then I wouldn't have to spend as much time in the production meeting trying to explain all of that, especially with Korean being my second language. It's a little bit more challenging. And speaking of having visual examples, I use the web clipper tool a lot when creating my board, and I would recommend, if you know someone you're going to work with, I would recommend going to their website, and if they have examples of the books that they've made before, go through with the web clipper tool and try to save a couple examples that they specifically have done. And you can refer even in your consultation, like, hey, I like this and this book you've done, and you already have them on your mood board to kind of connect it with the type of book that you want to make. So I would really recommend using the web clipper specifically with projects that the printer you're working with or potential printer you're going to work with has already done in the past. Additionally, I use the mobile app a lot in my production meeting because I wanted to bring my board with me, obviously, and be able to communicate that with the production team. I just easily could flip through my phone and show them the board directly on my iPhone. And I also could add a couple of notes last minute on the train over to the production meeting. I was like, oh, maybe I also want to put this, or oh, let me add this color or this note here, or maybe let me delete these few things. So especially if you're kind of like a last minute planner like me, having a mobile version and being able to edit it on the go can be super useful. Finally, I made a subboard for all of my final choices for the book after the production meeting. So we're going to offset print the book, and we're going to go with 3 fluorescent spot colors. Since these are out of the tin and they're not being custom mixed, it's going to be a lot easier to print with these and a lot more affordable. And I'm going to do a machine sewn binding, which made the most sense because the page thickness of all the pages is under 5 millimeters. The cover is going to be hardcover with a textured paper and tone-on-tone embossing. And I decided to go with this bright yellow because I wanted something that was eye-catching and that reflected how bright the inside of the book would be too. And finally, we're going to be using Munkin Pure Rough 150 GSM, which is pretty thick and has a nice texture and weight to it. I also made a final checklist on this board and I linked it to my main board, so there are some last steps to finalize before we start printing the interior pages next week. So if you're working on a project and want to keep everything in one spot, your ideas, references, and tasks, Milanote is perfect. And you can get started for free with no time limit using the link in the description. Now, when it came to the production meeting, beyond bringing the mood board, like I said, you had maybe those couple of books that you had in mind when you're thinking of your art book plan. And if you have them in person, definitely bring them along with you. This was really, really helpful when I went to the production meeting because they were able to physically look through. They even took the book and were like, oh, this book has this thickness of pages, or this book is using this type of spot color printing. And the production manager took those examples really seriously and was looking at them through a magnifying glass essentially. And I would also mention just really bring in books that you know what you like about them, because you could maybe miscommunicate and they could think, oh, you want to reproduce this exact book with these exact specs. But if you want to kind of pick and choose, oh, I like the printing here, I like the cover there, I like the way the ink looks on this book. Be really specific about what things you like about which books. So for example, I brought one book with me that I just really liked the texture of the cover. And because I brought that book in, I found out it wasn't fabric. It was actually this paper called Angel Cloth that has the texture that's very similar to a fabric, but it's a lot less expensive. So I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't brought the book in, and I might have paid a lot more money to get that fabric type of cover instead of being able to use paper. And having that book with me was also reassuring to me because I knew this was a book whose cover I really liked and that I wouldn't be kind of compromising in that aspect by going with a paper option. We also finalized some of the printing details, like the paper, which is going to be Munkin paper. This was where the production manager actually took one of the books I brought in and measured the paper and was like, you need to choose a paper that is this thick. So we ended up going with one of the Munkin papers. I also learned that spot color printing is pretty difficult to do in Korea. It's not super common to have custom colors because it's so expensive. So we actually are going to use some neon colors to print the book. And we had a meeting and it was so funny. They started taking out the ink and mixing it there to kind of try to show me how different color combos would turn out. So all of that was really helpful, and I am really excited to be working with people who are clearly passionate about making books. And so the last few days, what I've been doing is all of the color separation and reso printing. You might be like, why are you reso printing for this book? I thought you were printing it with a production team. And the reason is I decided I really wanted to incorporate some sort of texture into the book. A lot of my work, I think, kind of shines well because of the different printing processes I use. And when it's just the digital image without any textures, I always kind of feel like the image looks flat or like it's missing something. I've realized that one of my favorite parts of printmaking is not only the process, but I really like this back and forth. Like we're going between the computer and printing and then scanning and adjusting, and it's almost like a communication with these different mediums that leads to unexpected things or leads to some sort of spontaneity that I can't get just from digitally illustrating by itself. Since the offset printing also works with spot colors, I ended up printing every single illustration in black 3 times. So once for yellow, once for green, once for pink. Then I would scan all of those into the computer, digitally edit them to make sure they were dark enough to work, but also still had some of the texture. Then I would layer those, and that would become the final illustration in the book. So there are a lot of steps to manage, and again, having that checklist on Milanote to kind of figure out where I was in the process for each page was really helpful for keeping track. This is a lot more work, obviously, than just coloring it, like sending it through and printing it all on the computer. But for me, it's worth it because not only the fact that I like this form of printmaking, the last couple of years, most of my personal work has been reso printed or in some form printed matter. And I think if I were just to go straight from digital to book, it wouldn't capture that same story. And so for me, the printing method and the scanning and all of that is also a part of the storytelling. However, all of these different processes and all of these long kind of drawn out ways to get the image do kind of make trouble when it comes to deadlines. So let's talk about deadlines, especially with personal projects. I felt like I had a tight timeline when I was working on this. I stayed at the studio late, I canceled social plans. I really tried to focus all of my energy on this project as much as I could the last week and definitely the last couple of days leading up to my deadline. So my deadline was Wednesday/Thursday morning to send everything in. And it was a self-imposed deadline. Like technically, I probably could have stretched it a little bit more, but it was important for me to keep the deadline. And the reason why I set a hard date like this is to get some momentum, because if I always have it in my head that like, I can push it back a little bit more, it just encourages me to draw things out unnecessarily, and I would rather just really focus and get things done all at once. So while I was pretty on top of my planning, I still needed a little bit of a push, a little bit of a time crunch, I feel, to truly get everything done and push me to wrap it all up. And it also impacts my decision-making process too. So for example, I have to prioritize certain things. I have to make different decisions if I have a hard deadline like this versus, oh, I have a couple weeks to still decide if I like this or I want to change that. And that leads to some pretty big compromises that I ended up making for this project. And I think it's important for any project to be able to make compromises, even for an art book project. One of the compromises was I kind of had to simplify some of the things I was thinking of. So initially, even before the reso printing, I was thinking of pen plotting every image and using those textures in the book. And it became clear to me that that wasn't going to happen with the time that I had left. And so that's why I was forced to reso print everything, but I think it turned out for the best. Another compromise I made was with the number of illustrations. So originally I wanted to incorporate some extra like full page illustrations in addition to all of the little mini stamp illustrations, like one for the cover page, one for the intro, one for the outro. And I had like one day left, so I didn't have time to make like 5 illustrations and then print them and then scan them and all of that and do the text. So I decided to just focus on one illustration for the intro page where I have the intro text. And then I had to be a little bit creative and try to reuse some things or simplify some things for the inside cover page and the like ending page. So I basically took all of my stamped illustrations and made them a bit smaller and kind of made this nice like intro and outro page using that motif. And then I just simplified some of the like title page text and the credits text. Ultimately, deadlines force you to make choices, and I think sometimes those choices can be for the best because you learn to work a bit smarter instead of harder and learn to simplify things where you can, where they can actually look more elegant than if you made them overly complicated. So to wrap it up, this project feels like a pretty huge milestone for me. I'm investing a good chunk of my own money and a lot of my time into it, but it's not just about making a book. It's about taking the last couple years of this process and the style that I feel like I've developed more and more over the last couple of years and almost making this summarization the centerpiece of, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what I've been doing, and this is what I have to show for it, and that's really cool. Thanks again for following along with my artist book project. If you have any questions, leave them down below. And if you want to keep up with me and all of my book projects and zine projects and studio things, you can find me on Patreon. And if you're interested in trying Mila Note for your next book project, you can try it for free with the link in the description. I'll see you guys very soon. Bye.